Now,
on News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
O'Connor and Company.
It is 7:06 on O'Connor and Company on this Monday morning in your nation's capital, and an important Monday morning, as 22 years ago today, our country was attacked on September 11th, and we will continue to reflect on that and discuss it and remember those who lost their lives that day and those who committed their lives to fight that war every day since then. Also, President Biden will touch down in Anchorage, Alaska to sort of give a token remembrance of sorts.
Because when you think of 9/11, you think of Anchorage, Alaska.
Sure. It's the first time since September 11th, 2001 that a president of the United States will not be either at the Pentagon or in New York, or both, by the way. Some presidents have been able to do both. He's gonna be in Anchorage because he's got business, important business.
Very important person.
Got to get to. Coming up at 7:35, Trevor Matich on yesterday's Commander's victory. At 8:05, Rick Prado, former CIA officer, about 9/11 and our response. And at 8:35, as I mentioned, Scott Smith, that dad out of Loudoun County who just got a pardon from Governor Glenn Youngkin. I'm Larry O'Connor. That's Julie Gunlock. And joining us now is Joe diGenova, former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. And Joe, it's always great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning.
You know, before I get into some of the news of the day, of the week, I would love for you to take a moment from a perspective as a U.S. Attorney, as a member of the Justice Department, a veteran at the time of the Justice Department, of course, on September 11th, 2001, about, first of all, your immediate reaction to that, because a big part of your job as the U.S. Attorney in D.C. here had to do with national security and, well, Homeland Security before we had a Department of Homeland Security. Sort of your impression of 9/11 on that day, but also how the Justice Department and the intelligence agencies were sort of restructured since then, and whether it's time to re-examine it, Joe. Go ahead.
Well, America was dumbstruck on that day, could not believe that such an attack could occur. I remember I received a call from a reporter shortly after it had occurred, and I said, this is another Pearl Harbor. And that's exactly what it was. It was devastating in its impact, not only on all the people who were killed, the brave people who went to rescue people at the Pentagon and other acts of valor that occurred during that period of time, but what it did to our system of government. And it's fascinating to me that the Justice Department, which obviously was a smart thing to do, retooled itself under President George W. Bush in order to deal with terrorism, which had basically there had been war declared on the United States, and we were not ready for it. We were not ready for it in our civil and criminal courts. And we weren't ready for it militarily in the sense that we didn't have the intelligence structure to have prevented it. We found out, lest people forget, that the FBI, which has now come under such increased scrutiny now because of its illegal and unconstitutional conduct over the last 6 to 7 years, was completely caught off guard by it, as was the CIA. But the Bureau had indications early on of people doing test flying. All they wanted to do was figure out how to take off. They didn't want to learn how to land.
Yeah.
And FBI agents who found out about that were told that it was nonsense and that they were wasting their time. I'll never forget the female agent who testified on Capitol Hill about that. But what's happened now is that this security state that we created after 9/11 has been converted into a security state against the American people under the tutelage of Merrick Garland and Christopher Wray. It's been a slow descent into an anti-democratic, anti-constitutional structure of security, which has emboldened people in law enforcement to call traditional Catholics terrorists, to spy on them, to call parents who go to board meetings terrorists. I think what we've seen is overreaching by the federal government in the name of security, but in fact in the name of a philosophy of government that none of us, certainly most Americans, don't agree with. So I think the legacy of 9/11 is we have to remember it not only for those who died, but for those since then who've been harmed by the government reaction to it. And a lot of people may not like that. They may not like the sound of that. But we have created a monster in our security state. The FBI is unrecognizable It's not the once great law enforcement agency that it was. It's the checkup. And people who don't believe that are stupid.
I'm curious your opinion also on the creation of the Department of Homeland Security in the wake of 9/11. At the time, we always heard this phrase, there wasn't connecting the dots. The dots weren't being connected. And the idea was that the CIA and the FBI and other federal agents weren't talking to each other, and that there was too much bureaucracy. And then Congress, in their wisdom, creates more bureaucracy by creating this whole new federal agency. At the time, were you concerned about that? Did you think that was the smart thing to do, or should we streamline and create better management of these agencies?
At the time, I was against the creation of the Department of Homeland Security for the very reasons you've just given. It was nothing more than a Band-Aid. It was designed to make people think that the government was actually doing something about this. There was plenty of firepower available to prevent 9/11. It wasn't used. And that's because of the management inside the CIA, the management inside the FBI, and the management inside NSA. We had so much power of surveillance and other things available to us for investigation. We simply did not do our job. FBI agents did not do their job. CIA analysts did not do their job. The people who did do their job were not listened to. And that ends up being all about leadership. It has nothing to do with brick and mortar buildings. You either have good people leading these agencies or you don't. And right now, and for a number of years, we've had the wrong people leading these agencies.
Joe, at the time of the formation of the Department of Homeland Security and the Patriot Act and all of the additional robust surveillance powers that the intelligence community was given, there were several voices who said, yeah, this makes sense, and yes, for our security, we need it. But what if it's misused? What if it's appropriated for political purposes? This kind of power, this kind of surveillance, this kind of secrecy can only lead to political doom. And I think we've seen it. I think we saw it. You know, let's not forget the investigation into the Trump campaign based on the Steele dossier. That was a counterterrorism investigation, and therefore it was shrouded in secrecy. The FISA warrants were shrouded in secrecy. Is it time to do away with this? Is it because I don't feel like we can trust the checks and balances that were put in place there because they failed, and I don't know if I trust the next step of checks and balances.
Well, you certainly can't trust them in the hands of Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, Christopher Wray, and company. This group of people has made it very clear that they could care less about the constitutional rights of American citizens, and that they could care less about security per se. You don't coddle the Chinese and the Russians if you actually believe that there are serious threats to national security. I don't think there's any doubt that the FISA court has been abused not only by the people who appear before the FISA court, but by the FISA court itself, which has done nothing to discipline the people who appeared before it and lied to it. And apparently some of the judges who are currently there think that lying to them is no big deal. Mr. Boasberg, Judge Boasberg, and others who think that it's just fine, apparently, to lie to the court. I don't know of any order that they have issued sanctioning anybody for lies that were told to the court, upon which warrants were obtained against American citizens who did nothing wrong. It's an amazing panoply of useless characters, from whether it's inside the FBI, the CIA, the NSA. By the way, the great hero in all of this is former Admiral Mike Rogers, who was at the head of NSA.
That's right.
And blew the whistle on the illegal spying that was going on, went to the FISA court, informed them of it, and then the FISA court, in its clumsy and club-footed way, spent years figuring out what was going on, even though they had everything given to them on a silver platter. I think one of the shameful episodes in American history is the degree to which the federal judges we relied on to protect us and to protect our rights failed miserably. But not a single hearing on that on Capitol Hill in either house under either party. Really fascinating to me that there could have been such a breakdown in judicial work. You know, it doesn't do any good for a court 2 years later to make publicly and have it declassified that there were 170,000 illegal searches of the NSA databases by FBI agents.
Yeah.
What good does that do us 2 years later?
You're right. I'll leave it there. Joe diGenova, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
God bless everybody.
Amen. 7:16. WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
I can hear you! I can hear you! The rest of the world hears you! And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Today is the anniversary of September 11th, 2001. 22 years ago today, just a couple of hours from now, it was clear that our nation was under attack and that we were at war, and it was a new kind of war. I always had trouble with the global war on terror because terror is a tactic, not an entity, not a thing. But you'll remember in the intervening days after the September 11th attacks, one of the most overriding political messages we kept hearing was, well, let's not demonize everyone who practices Islam. It's not always, and of course, nobody was demonizing anyone who practiced that religion, but these were terrorist attacks brought on by terrorist organizations who saw a warped and despotic view of that religion. They did it in the name of that religion.
It's just so interesting. As you say that, I think of 22 years later, the Department of Justice and the FBI was looking into people who went to the Latin Mass.
Right.
So I guess.
Thank you.
I guess it's okay now.
Yeah. No, it was okay then too. Just not. Some religions are more, are more exempt of such scrutiny than others, apparently. Even though, well, you do remember that horrific terrorist attack from several years ago that killed 3,000 people in the name of Catholicism.
Lord.
And we can't, we do wisdom dies sometimes at moments like this, and there are people who get great benefit politically by saying, how dare you? It's like no one has dared. No one did. But so of course it became. Remember when President Bush at the time was talking about the attempt to track down everyone in Al Qaeda who had anything to do with the attack, and he referred to it as a crusade.
Oh dear.
He used the word crusade. Yes. It's like aha. It's like, okay, guys, I don't really think you want to have a realistic historical conversation about the Crusades.
Right.
Y'all don't come out looking so good either. That said, it is 22 years later, and I've always admired the fact that people go to great pains not to politicize and not to try to, at least on days like this, to not make it political. I was always bothered by the fact that the Obamas, it appeared, if I remember right, it was the Obamas who instituted this. It's a day of service. It's a day we should volunteer, and they would volunteer at some left-wing progressive soup kitchen or something. It's like, wait a minute, that's not really the lesson. The lesson from 9/11 is not to make sure that you volunteer at a soup kitchen.
Right.
It always bugged me. I also was completely bothered by the fact that first responders, firemen, and police members of the police department were used as political props so often by politicians. They'd have them in the background there at a campaign event saying, we love our first responders. Thank God for our first responders. And then, George Floyd happens and screw the first responders.
Oh, exactly.
Defund the first responders.
Yes.
The first responders are the problem,
Yes. Well, and there were things that I disagreed with at the time. After 9/11, suddenly every, fire and police station needed to be, have all of these special hazard equipment and had to be trained and have these,
almost domestic military equipment.
It was, and there was some real concern about that. I mean, offloading DOJ products onto local, for police stations. It's interesting if you drive across, and this is still true today. If you drive across the country, you go through some very poor areas of the country, and the houses are falling down. There's obviously no factories or no employment in the town, but the fire station and the police station are these beautiful buildings, right? And the schools often are the only things, and you can tell there was just a ton of money going to these fire stations and police stations. And I'm not saying that's all bad, but there was a sort of militarization that happened.
You saw at the Commanders game yesterday. The Prince George's County Police had like armored
tanks.
Vehicles there. It was really like, wow. Really, join the army and be a Prince George's cop. So let me continue my further politicization of this day by criticizing President Biden. For the first time in 22 years, Joe Biden, the President of the United States, there's three main places that the president should be. He should be at Ground Zero in Manhattan, he should be at the Pentagon, or he should be in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Yep. And instead he'll be in Anchorage, Alaska. He will touch down, and it's so obviously just a token.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I guess I got to be somewhere in America.
I got to go back.
Right. He was in Vietnam yesterday. He was in India for the G20, and it was important for him to meet with the Prime Minister of Vietnam and give a press conference session and whatever it was. He could have left early in the morning yesterday.
He made a fool of himself.
It was embarrassing.
Totally
it embarrassed our nation, embarrassed himself.
They cut him off.
Yeah, we'll play you some of that a little later in the program. But he could have left in the morning yesterday, and he could have been in the United States. He could have been on the East Coast. He could have been in Manhattan. He could have been in D.C. He's not. He deliberately chose. I still think it was some of the idiotic staffers who scheduled this without knowing, because they're 12 years old and they didn't get it. But it could have been President Biden who said, well, I don't know who put this stupid schedule together, but I am not going to be in D.C. on September 11th.
Maybe Jill, because I suspect she's in a lot more charge than we give her credit for. Could someone point out that this is a really nasty look for the White House?
I mean, that would...
I know.
Jill Biden is...
She was too busy.
She's responsible for nasty looks
off the couches
with her dresses.
For her new dress.
And also this allows her to actually be the representative of the Biden administration. She will be at the Pentagon Memorial today.
Do we know where Kamala's going to be?
She's still sort of sleeping it off from her 50th anniversary of hip-hop party at the,
talk about embarrassing. Oh, my gosh.
She's the grown-ups are in charge, too, right? It's 7. All right, coming up, it's time to talk to Trevor Matich about yesterday's victory. And then, did you see what the governor of New Mexico did? It's kind of unconstitutional. Well, she's a Democrat.
WMAL-FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station. Saluting the heroes of September 11th. We will always remember. And now, the news.
Now,
On News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
O'Connor and Company.
7:36 now on this Monday morning in the nation's capital as we continue to reflect on the events of September 11th. Thank you for joining us here. Coming up later in the program at 8:05, we're going to check in with Rick Prado, a former CIA officer, talk to him about the events of September 11th and everything in the last 22 years. And then at 8:35, Scott Smith at Dad in Loudoun County. He is back in the news because he got it, and for good reasons. He's been pardoned by Governor Glenn Youngkin. So we'll hear right from Scott Smith on that. Larry O'Connor, Julie Gunlock.
Good morning.
Good morning to you, Julie. And let's get right to it with a recap of yesterday's opening day at FedEx. We were there. It was sold out, 64,000 people. And I got to tell you, all burgundy and gold.
Yeah.
Now, there may have been some cardinal color in there that just blended in, but boy, you didn't hear them. Almost every defensive stand, everyone in the stadium on their feet shouting. I mean, it reminded me, last time I've seen that at FedEx was RG3's rookie year.
Yeah.
So right there with the welcome home slogan of the team on the stadium, something's happening there. Oh, and by the way, the team won. But did they win well enough? Was it a big enough victory? People were expecting more. How'd they look, and what should we expect when we play teams that aren't quite as easy as the Arizona Cardinals? Let's bring in Trevor Matich, our WMAL Commanders analyst. What do you think, Trevor?
Well, hey, Julie, it's been a long time since there seems like a rebirth over there.
Yeah.
And that's what it kind of half felt like with the new ownership, with the fans filling the stadium that were actually Commanders fans instead of tickets being sold to the other team because they couldn't get tickets at their home stadium, but they knew that they were easy and cheap to get at FedEx Field as a road team. The feel was great. It was a rebirth of the team, and it was a rebirth of the team if you only watched the defense.
Yes.
But at least they got the win.
Yes. But off the offense, there didn't seem to be much new, actually. In fact, it was the same old story.
Yeah, it was the same old story. I mean, they partied like it was 2019. Didn't they?
Yeah.
The offense, though, shows signs of life. there were good things that the offense did. I mean, the offense struggled to move the ball at times. They made big mistakes at times. I think people are really talking about the quarterback, Sam Howell.
Right.
And how he did, right? Because he's the future of this team until he's not. And he did some very good things in this game. He also did some things that future opponents will absolutely exploit. They will literally grab Sam Howell by the ankles and just like Bam Bam in the Flintstones, just swing him to one side to the other, bam, 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 and hit his head on the ground if he doesn't fix some of those things. But for this opener, the good things that he did are things to build from. Now he has to build from them.
So, Trevor, one thing that I kept hearing from everyone around me in the game and certainly what I saw on social media afterwards was Sam Howell's got some of the best wide receiver weapons in the NFL. And it took, I mean, there were several plays where he just didn't see them. They were wide open. And you would think he's got a good arm, but does he just not see them? Is the game going too fast for him? Because it was very frustrating. It was like, throw the ball. He's right there. Jahan Dotson's open. Throw the ball.
Yeah, it seems like in this game he had a good arm, bad neck. Because he basically stared at one receiver, and if he was open, he threw the ball, and it was decisive, and most of the time it looked great. But if that guy wasn't there, then there were problems. And some of that was Sam. Some of that was a clock in his head knowing that he didn't have good protection. They sacked him 6 times.
Yeah.
And there were goofy sacks, too. I mean, not just a normal sack where a blocker got beat, but, where blockers tripped each other, where, there was just all kinds of goofy stuff going on. And so I kind of think he didn't want to take time in the pocket to scan the field. That's one of those things that he'll need to fix next time around, because if he just stares at one receiver, Denver next week will jump that receiver, and they'll be pick six after pick six. But he was decisive and accurate when he decided to throw to that one spot. So he just didn't see a whole lot else.
And back to the offense again. In terms of the play call, was that Ron Rivera's offensive scheme, or was it our new offensive coordinator?
It was Eric Bieniemy.
Yeah, but was it? Because or is this what he's going to do when he doesn't have Patrick Mahomes? Because boy, it sure was boring.
Well, I think they were trying to do no harm. I mean, the Cardinals are the worst team in the league, and they got even worse when they cut some good players or allowed them to leave and traded and stuff like that. It's almost like the Cardinals were trying to tank to get a good quarterback at the top of next year's draft. I'm not accusing them of that, but so I think Washington first.
I mean, you are a little bit.
And Washington was slightly better than them. So, hey, it's a starting point. It's a place to build from. But I think the offense, there were some boos at one point where late in the game there was conservative play calling. But at the same time, Washington's offense was not going to win this game no matter what they did. They were only going to lose it because the defense was going to win the game. And Washington tried to lose it with a sack, fumble, scoop and score by the Cardinals defense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so that's the kind of thing they were trying to avoid. That's why it looked what some people would say was boring.
So the next home game is against the Buffalo Bills, and they are not the Phoenix Cardinals. Would you recommend fans come out and see the game? I mean, it's a brand new experience now, Trevor. What are you saying to your friends?
Yeah, I think fans should come out. They should cheer because fans now, for the first time in a long time, can be part of helping to win these home games because the team actually is getting better, and the offense, I think, was as bad as it's going to look all year in this opener.
Okay.
So, come out, fans. Come out, scream and yell because you're part of this turnaround with the new owners.
Well, and when the defense was on the field, it sure felt like the fans were a part of it. It had that 11th player feel going for it. Or 12th man.
Well, the fans, they were one, and the thing is that the organization had no right to expect the fans to support them until they started winning big.
Yeah.
But the fans came out anyway because they have stayed with this team in their heart.
Yeah. Also, real fast, did you? I know you, Julie, you loved the moment when they showed Riggo up in that. A lot of alums.
Yeah.
And Trevor, talk to me about the moment they showed Riggo. The crowd screams, and then he opens up his jacket, and his lining is a Redskins logo.
And then the camera pans away.
Yeah, the
fast.
camera tightened the shot. But boy, that was the biggest ovation of the night, seeing the Redskins logo up there.
Yeah. But isn't that Riggo? I mean, famously, way back in the day, he called Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor Sandy.
Yeah.
And so, that's our Riggo. We love him for that.
He is. He's got cojones that he would bring to the field in a wheelbarrow. Love that. All right, Trevor. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Also, Riggo has a great head of hair. Have you noticed his Riggins hair? Not a lot of football players have hair like that because they wear the helmet and their hair gets pulled out, doesn't grow back. I know we should be all worried about earthquakes, obviously. But have you thought about the devastating moonquake problem?
I have not.
That our friends and neighbors on the moon are experiencing. India's on the moon.
I did not
They
know.
launched a moon rover. India's been roving around on the moon there, and apparently they just detected a moonquake, the first one that we've detected since the 70s. There's an instrument for lunar seismic activity attached to their Vikram lander. I love that they named it Vikram because, but didn't name it Patel. It's like it's like John Smith, right? What are you going to do? We're going to call our India moonlander Vikram Patel. Anyway, the Vikram lander detected the seismic activity on the surface August 26th. It landed on the 23rd, so it's been there 3 days, and it felt a moonquake. Or they're just terrible drivers.
Maybe.
What?
Could be.
Maybe the rover was just like driving it crazy. What's going on there? Oh, I think it's an earthquake.
Yeah.
Sure enough. I mean, moonquake. The Apollo lunar missions, by the way, from 69 to 77, detected seismic activity on the moon. It proved that the moon had a whole geological structure with plates and things like that and all the stuff that we got to worry about. Now, Martian moons are not like that, by the way. They don't have any plates. They're just like a chunk, like Chunk Todd kind of thing. Got to give Chris Plank credit for that. Otherwise, he'll yell, "You're stealing my bit!" every time.
He'll make us clean extra hard today.
So anyway, we're going to see. Part of why they're up there with the lunar lands, they're trying to discover more things about the moon because eventually Elon Musk, after he takes over this planet, will be sending his rockets
That's
to
where his children are going to live.
the moon, right? He's going to do his colony there, and then that will be how we launch to Mars.
Yeah, he had another one. Did you know that?
Did he have another kid?
Yes.
Wow. How many is that?
Another weird name. I think that's 13.
It's also he's
Maybe
going to
12.
repopulate
Maybe
the
11.
planet after the nuclear holocaust. So there you go. Moonquakes.
After our planet burns up
on the moon.
Larry.
Right, because of
change.
climate change.
Yes.
Or very spicy Indian food. Can I make any other? Can I get myself in trouble anymore? I really like that Vivek Ramaswamy guy. There. Am I all right now? Okay, good. I'm
Better
going
than
to a
Nikki
Fairfax
Haley.
County School Board meeting now and
Nikki
really
Haley,
raise hell.
don't forget about her.
Oh, sure. That's right. Yes. It's 7:54.